Hey guys, so next video in my movie and TV fight review series. I am Matt Easton. One of my favourite films of my teenage years was the film Excalibur, British-Irish film made in 1981 I believe, starring Nigel Terry and a bunch of other people. There's an early appearance by Liam Neeson before he was really famous in there as well. The fight that I've picked, there are other fights in there that I might look at in the future, but the fight that I've picked is the sort of centrepiece fight between King Arthur and Lancelot. So first off, the armour is very nice, okay? The armour in Excalibur, ironically considering that it's set in a period that isn't historical, it's actually pretty good historical kind of early 16th century style armour made by the armourer Terry English, who's a very renowned British armourer. The fight starts off with an exchange of lances on horseback, and the jousting is pretty well done. The first exchange is pretty nice. However, the second exchange, the thing to pick up on, and as always I'll put the link below this video so you can watch it for yourself. When Arthur comes in for the second lance, he actually has his lance on the wrong side of his horse's head, hence he gets knocked off his horse and doesn't do any damage to Lancelot whatsoever because his lance was pointing in the wrong direction. Okay, so bad move by Arthur there, fairly schoolboy error as we would call it, basic mistake. So Arthur is now on foot, and in actual fact Lancelot, being honourable, he dismounts as well to carry on the fight on foot. And a curious thing, and something that I suppose bugs me a little bit, is that they both remove their helmets. In fact, Arthur has a mail coif, as we call it, on his head, but no padding underneath it, so it's not really going to prevent his head from being caved in at all. It's a bit stupid wearing mail with nothing underneath it. And Lancelot has nothing on his head at all. Now you could say that this is to enable better, vision, breathing, all of that kind of stuff. And yes, when you're fighting in armour on foot, there is an advantage to having sometimes an open-faced helmet or raising your visor so you can actually see better. You sacrifice some protection to do that, but what you gain is better vision and breathing, and the benefits can outweigh the disadvantages. However, in this case, they both completely remove their helmets, which I think is pretty silly in a martial context, because a fairly superficial hit with a sword in the head can put you out of action. So they've got utterly protected bodies, very difficult to wound on the body, and completely exposed heads, which is a bit stupid. Okay, they then proceed to fight. It's fairly nicely choreographed, but my main issue is that, and this is an issue I have with all of the fighting in Excalibur in hindsight, looking at it now, knowing what I do about armoured fighting. When I was watching it as a kid I didn't necessarily appreciate this so much, is that they exchange a lot of blows on the armour. Now that's not to say that wasn't done in a kind of tournament setting where they were not aiming to necessarily kill each other, of course, and they weren't even necessarily aiming to hurt each other badly. They were really playing a combat sport. But what we're seeing here doesn't seem to really be that. They are actually hitting each other to wound, but they're aiming their blows at the armour, and especially with swords, it just does nothing. A sword is a fairly light object, and maybe a mace or an axe, just hitting the armour might have some effect, but with a sword it's not really going to do much at all. So it's pretty stupid that they do that. However, what is good about the fighting is they do a fair amount of grappling and kind of shoving each other around, throwing each other into a tree and down a slope and so on, and that's really good, and that is what we see in the treatises from historical armoured fighting. There is lots of grappling, shoving, pushing, trying to get the other person on the ground and such like, okay, and sort of trying to get their weapon off them as well, grabbing, grappling type stuff. That's really good. That's good that they show that, and it's more rough and tumble, and it's good that they thought about that. Equally, it's really good that they have Lancelot doing some half-swording. I'm not even sure that they realised it was half-swording and what it was for, but they do have him holding his sword and later on his sort of poleaxe type thing, obviously in two hands, using it to block with both ends and the middle, and stabbing into gaps with it. And that is pretty much fairly revolutionary thing actually to be showing in a 1981 film of armoured fighting. Is they actually show not an awful lot, but they do show in one key part of the fight the fact that Lancelot is aiming his stabs sort of in the gaps of the armour, and that's really, really good. That's what armoured fighting's really about. It's about stabbing into the gaps between plates in the plate armour. Okay, now in the case of this film, there isn't any mail in the gaps, whereas with real plate armour there would usually be mail filling most of the gaps that are left exposed by the plates. However, in this case, Lancelot manages to get behind a pauldron, which is a shoulder plate, and repeatedly stabs Arthur in the shoulder. But it's really nice. They're showing a bit of half-swording, a bit of grappling, and a bit of stabbing into gaps in armour. So, by and large, as films go, and even by modern standards, that's pretty good. It gives a notion of what armoured fighting might look like, although in real armoured fighting you would expect to see a bit more grappling, more half-swording and more stabbing into gaps, and less just hitting plates. And lastly, to finish off, the finishing blow delivered by Arthur is essentially magic, so there's nothing to say about that. He just uses his sword, he calls on the magic of Excalibur, and he chops through the pole weapon type thing that Lancelot's using, and hits him on the breastplate, which kind of knocks him out. And I would question what that's supposed to signify, because a breastplate that isn't really in contact with your body, it sits away from the body in a globular form. That's why they're kind of domed like that. So impacts to the breastplate, the force gets carried around the breastplate and doesn't really impact on you. So I don't really, let's call it magic. Okay, so the fight is finished with magic, but by and large, pretty good armoured fight, and it's got some key elements of armoured fighting in there, even if the proportions aren't as much as we would like to see. Cheers!